Just a quick.
I'm back again. I'm Mark and I'm an addict. Thank you, Lewis. And thank you, Kelly. One of the things that I said as a chairperson, and Ernest is continually hearing me say this, that in consensus-based decision making, there is not a no vote. If you are not in favor of something, then tell us what would make you be in favor of it. So don't say no, but say, this is my solution to this. This is what would allow me to vote with this. So that's something that I continually say to people in our area, the Orlando area in Florida, uses a hybrid of consensus-based decision making that uh, is, a hair's breadth away from Robert's Rules of Order. So they're still voting no without any explanation or compromise. And I think that's the essence of consensus-based decision making, is the compromise. Coming together, as the Latin translates. So I want to talk to you real quickly about the transition experience that Florida had moving from Robert's Rules to consensus-based decision making. And the slide before you is the motion that eventually came to the floor. And I think one of the biggest questions that needs to be answered on this is, well, why did you decide to change? What was the harbinger of change for the Florida region that brought about this this catastrophic turn of how to make decisions? And I think it was a number of things. One being back in, if you remember, back in 2004 to 2006, we were talking about the service system proposals, and there were some major changes happening for some people, and there were some new ideas and new concepts being introduced to the service structure. And at the same time, the World Service Conference had already decided to move towards consensus-based decision-making and a discussion-based conference. So at the time in 2006 and 7, we had an AD who had been a longtime member of the Florida region, and he came back into service, and he was probably the one who led the charge, so to speak, to consensus-based decision making. And I'll tell you that his name was Bob Gray. We lost him a few years ago. And I will tell you that without without him conspiring with the chair at the time, I probably would not be sitting here today. I probably would not have met many of you that I've already met. I certainly would not have, in hindsight, taken the service path that I took if it wasn't for Bob. So I want to mention that because he's here in spirit with me. And when I created these couple of little slides and I was going through all that research, I got real emotional about it, because we have people who are experienced, and sometimes we fail to take heed of their experience and their foresight. In hindsight as well, very, very close-minded. I was not open to this change. I was one of the people that said, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So sometime in 2007 or 8, and like I said earlier, my timeline may be off by a few months, the current chair of the Florida region, I was the vice chair, and the AD or the RD at the time, they got into a little room and they decided what was going to happen. And I didn't know this. The last thing that the Florida chair did in his term of office was to appoint me the ad hoc chair on the regional structure change. Thank you very much. I didn't sign up for this. I don't have a clue what I'm doing, and I have no idea where to take this. And Bob's words to me were, don't worry about it. You can do it. You'll figure it out. So we embarked on this journey of 14 months. Every time the region met, we spent most of Saturday afternoon in roundtable discussions. identifying challenges of this system, of this consensus-based decision-making system. And there were many, and one of them I just mentioned was the closed-mindedness to change. You know, no matter what we are here, there are so many people that, you know, you give them something brand new, and the first answer is no. The second answer is, why do we need to do that? And I think the change came about because there was a lot of disunity over the service system proposals. And what we found at our region was the subcommittees had been meeting in separate rooms on Saturday morning and part of Saturday afternoon. So public relations, which was public information at the time, never spoke to H&I. They had no clue what H&I was doing throughout the region. H&I had no idea what the web page was doing. The web page had no idea what public relations doing, and none of them had any idea that if they simply met in the same room, they could get a whole lot more done, and that they could help each other a whole lot more in their growth of their areas. So I think that's what brought the change on. There was some people at the region at the time also that were very versed in Robert's Rules of Order, and we were getting nothing done on Sunday. We were stuck. We were stuck in motions to amend, laying on the table, all of those things, those terms in Robert's Rules that can tie up a body for a long time. So long story short, 14 months of roundtable discussions. We identified, and I believe it was 27 challenges to consensus-based decision-making and making the change. And we addressed each one of those until we found a solution. And by the time the 14 months ended, most, I won't say all, most of the people that were completely against this change had come around and said, this sounds like a really good idea. Let's try it. And unfortunately, what happened, and this is one of the reasons I brought the timeline into effect, we spent that 14 months identifying the challenges that we knew of or that we thought we knew of. And then in the next several months after the motion came to the floor and it passed, we went to creating a guideline. We didn't want a policy because policy somehow seems very rigid. And you had your policy wonks back then, and I was one of them. Well, you're not following the policy. And there was a line here and a line here, and we had to stay in those lines. So we decided to create guidelines where we had a little bit of flexibility, and we had some movement on those boundaries so that if we used the traditions and concepts as our guides, we didn't need to have a rigid policy. One of the biggest challenges was exactly what Kelly brought up in our mock region, was that you're taking the groups out of the decision-making process. The challenge is that many areas still used Robert's Rules of Order. What were they going to do when they had their group's conscience and somebody brought up a proposal or a modification to a proposal on the floor while we were discussing it? Well, we came up with the solution that any RCM at any time can ask for the proposal to be sent back to the groups. We thought that eliminated the issue. In theory, it does. And then one of the RCMs who was against this process went back to their area and said, region is disbanding subcommittees. They don't need us there anymore. They're not meeting anymore, so we don't have to go. And we went from attendance on Saturday afternoon of 75 to 100 people. We were getting down to 20 people, and we didn't know how to solve it. So, and if you would, go to the next slide. Oh, you're already there. That's all right. So we came up with these guidelines, and we started moving along, and we had 10 work group projects going at the same time. And we had an HRP panel, human resource panel, and we modeled it after the WSC model. And it was working fine. However, what happened is we really didn't know where we were going or what we were doing. So then we started to work a little bit too far outside the boundaries of our guidelines, and we were extending terms of trusted servants, which created resentments and animosities. It was creating an atmosphere of personality rather than principle. So we identified a lot of bugs along the way, and we made changes. We made those changes through consensus-based decision making. We discussed it, we came to compromises, and we changed our guidelines as we went along. We are into our 11th year of consensus-based decision making. Ernest will probably be able to give you a really up-to-date idea of how it's going. I think it's a much better process for our region. After a while, after a couple of years, we started to get rid of the rumor that subcommittees weren't needed at region anymore, and they started coming back, and there was more participation. And we had this fellowship development group on Saturday where we were all in the same room, and we collaborated together and came up with new ideas, new work groups. And I think my experience has been that if I look back at the number of projects that we completed in the last 10 years compared to the 10 years before that, there's no comparison. There was just an enormous amount of productivity. It brought a lot more people into the participation mix, and it exposed a lot more people to the regional service level. And Ernest is one of them, actually, and I keep calling him out because he's here, and there he is. He has embraced this system, and he's become a part of it, and he's a leader in this system in the Florida region. And somebody mentioned it before, how important it is for the co-facilitator to be strong and to have an ability to listen and hear, and then be able to offer compromises that don't bring his own or her own opinion into the compromise. I've watched our region do some things that I absolutely positively did not agree with. However, when I was the facilitator, I allowed the body to make their decisions. So I think it would be better if there were questions and answers about that transition period. I will tell you that we've had some difficulty in some areas with the human resource panel, and that had more to do with the individuals involved than it did to do with the system. I think that's the case on all levels of service. You have people that might be leading some down a path that is not what was intended, and then it takes a lot to get out of that. I don't know if there's any details that are necessary here, but that happened both with our fellowship development coordinators as well as with our human resource panel. And it's a fight to get it back on the tracks once it's off the tracks. But the system itself has worked for the Florida region. I think we've always been involved in service at the world level, and this kind of made it a whole lot easier to be involved. It was familiar. I know that the journey I had in one being the ad hoc chair on the structure change itself, oftentimes I left region thinking, why the hell am I doing this? I don't need to take this abuse. However, on the other side of that, there was so much growth in my personal recovery as well as in my service commitments that I think it was worthwhile. So there you have it. That's kind of a synopsis of the change. There wasn't any real motivator to make the change other than that the fellowship was changing and we felt we should change with it. And our service symposiums were an example of that. When we started the service symposium in 2005, that was new to everybody, and it's still going on. And I think they're going to have a virtual Florida Service Symposium this year. So, yeah, we'll see. More will be revealed. So yeah, if there are any questions about the transition, I'm more than happy to answer them.
And in general, if you have any questions about, to Dennis, Mark, or I, just raise your hand. Carlos, followed by Thiago.
I'm Carlos. I'm an addict. I'm currently serving as the RCM for my area, in my region, just finishing the term. And we started talking about consensus-based, and whenever there is consensus, it's very good to move on. But whenever there is not consensus, then Robert's rules come back again. I've seen change in the world services in two occasions. In '96, when the motto was, no change comes little by little, but through a revolution. And that was the motto then, and the change was done radically. And then I've been a delegate to my region for 6 years recently, and I've seen another motto, change must come little by little. And some of those changes didn't go through, like the service system, and I have seen trouble in that change when we had both systems in the same conference, and we had like a lot of time discussing how the decisions were going to be made. So my question is, revolution or little by little?
That's a great question, and that's one of the reasons I put the timeline in my slides for both the WSC and the Florida region.
Let me jump in on that, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before I moved, I got clean in Washington, D.C. in 1987. I moved to Chicago in 2003, where I didn't do much region in Washington, but I started to in Chicago. And the Chicagoland region, after a presentation by two people from Wisconsin, who I'm sure many of you know, decided to switch to consensus-based decision-making without even a policy. So it was just like, whoop! In one meeting they had it, and the other meeting they didn't have it. And so we operated that way, even though we didn't have a policy. I moved to Chicago, saw this, and I was one of the people who wrote our policy. And so it still worked. It still worked. It was very much revolution. We just made the switch and boom, then it happened. But yet, I can also see why, the step-by-step is valuable as well. And, anybody, I got Thiago and then Laura. Laura, let me unmute you, Thiago. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good. I'm Thiago and I'm an addict. Thank you guys so much for the presentation. Good to see you, Mark, again after the WSC. My question is a quick one. I'm from the greater Sao Paulo region. We have pretty much an army of followers of the Roberts rules, and that includes most of the areas here as well. In terms of transition, would you have what would be the most important 2 or 3 points to consider when initiating some kind of a transition? Sorry about my baby.
That's okay. I would say having a clear goal of how far you want to change. So in other words, maybe put together at least an outline of guidelines and the system you want to follow. And then I think the most important thing is that you ask everyone to at least open their mind to hearing the process. The ad hoc committee on this structure change in Florida was actually participating in consensus-based decision-making before they knew it. And when we were done, I said, that's the CBDM process. And they were like, oh my God. So I think open-mindedness is the #1 issue that should be brought to the table.